Why is it that no matter how much aid is sent, no matter how many promises are made, the poor countries of the world never seem to catch up? We live in an age where information travels at the speed of light, where innovation can emerge from a laptop in a bedroom. And yet somehow, the same handful of nations continue to dominate the global economy, decade after decade. Here's a question that should bother every one of us. If poor countries are developing, then why does the gap between rich and poor keep widening? In fact, in 1960, the richest 20% of countries were about 30 times richer than the poorest 20%. Today, that gap isn't 32-1 anymore. It's closer to 82-1. So what's really going on here? Is it corruption? Bad leadership? Geography? Or is the entire global system quietly designed to keep some nations rich and others poor? To understand why the world looks like this, we have to go centuries back to the birth of the modern economy. It didn't start with computers or factories. It started with ships. In the 1500s, European explorers set sail not for adventure, but for resources. Gold from Africa, spices from Asia, silver from Latin America. They called it exploration. But it was extraction. Between 1500 and 1900, Europe built its wealth not just through trade, but through the systematic transfer of value from colonies to empire. While Britain was building railroads in India, it wasn't out of kindness. It was to extract cotton faster. While Belgium ruled Congo, it wasn't to civilize. It was to exploit rubber and ivory. Every empire that rose during that time, Spain, Portugal, France, Britain, grew rich because someone else was getting poorer. By 1900, Europe controlled 84% of the world's land surface. That's not a coincidence. That's economic design. And here's the catch. The consequences of that system didn't end when colonies gained independence. They just changed their shape. When these colonies became independent in the mid-20th century, they inherited borders drawn by outsiders, economies built around exporting raw materials, and institutions designed to serve foreign masters. This is what economists call path dependency. Once an economy is built to extract and export, not innovate and build, it becomes trapped in that structure. A country rich in oil can stay poor in everything else. A nation rich in gold can still have empty hospitals and broken schools. Why? Because wealth from resources doesn't automatically translate into wealth for people. That's why Nigeria, one of the largest oil producers in the world, still struggles with poverty. It's why the Democratic Republic of Congo, sitting on trillions in minerals, remains one of the poorest nations on earth. Meanwhile, countries that invested early in people, education, and institutions like Japan, Germany, or South Korea transformed themselves in just a few decades. So yes, geography matters. But institutions matter more. After World War II, as old empires collapsed, a new kind of empire emerged, an economic one. In 1944, at a quiet resort in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, world leaders gathered to rebuild the global economy. What came out of that meeting was revolutionary. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund (IMF), and the dominance of one currency, the US dollar. The idea was to stabilize the world after war. The effect was something else entirely. From that moment on, rich countries controlled not just armies, but money itself. Every loan, every aid package, every trade agreement would flow through systems they designed. For poor countries trying to rebuild, that meant one thing: dependency. They could borrow money, yes, but only in dollars. They could develop industries, but only under free trade rules that kept them as suppliers of cheap goods and raw materials. And if they couldn't pay back their debts, the IMF would step in not to forgive, but to restructure. Meaning, raise taxes, cut public spending, privatize everything. Guess who benefits from that? Foreign corporations buying up assets at low prices. That's how the cycle began. Debt gives dependency, gives control. By the 1980s, many developing countries were drowning in debt. Oil prices had skyrocketed. Interest rates in the US had surged. And suddenly, the very loans that were supposed to help developing nations turned into economic nooses. Latin America called it the lost decade. Entire generations grew up under debt restructuring programs. Education budgets were cut. Health systems collapsed. In Africa, the same pattern repeated. Countries that were once self-sufficient in food became import-dependent. Factories shut down. Agricultural exports collapsed. Meanwhile, Western banks kept earning interest. This wasn't development. It was debt colonization.
Ads.
And just when the world thought globalization would level the playing field, it did the opposite. By the 1990s, the world entered the age of globalization. Open trade, open markets, open promises. The message was simple. If you open your borders and let foreign companies invest, prosperity will follow. And at first it seemed true. Factories moved to Asia, millions got jobs, economies grew. But look closer and you'll see a trap. Poor countries became assembly lines for rich countries' products. They produced goods, but not the ideas behind them. An iPhone assembled in China earns Apple a 40% profit margin. China earns less than 2%. The innovation stays in Silicon Valley, the labor stays overseas. This is what economists call the value chain trap. The closer you are to design and innovation, the more money you make. The closer you are to labor and raw materials, the less you keep. And even when poor countries try to climb the ladder, they face tariffs, trade restrictions, or intellectual property barriers that keep them locked in place. In 2020, the richest 10% of countries produced nearly 80% of all patents and 90% of all advanced technologies. The result? Rich countries grow faster because they already are rich, and poor countries fall behind because they already are poor. It's not competition anymore, it's a feedback loop. So what about all that foreign aid? The billions sent every year to help developing nations? Here's the shocking truth. For every $1 poor countries receive in aid, they lose $2 or more in debt repayments, tax evasion, and capital flight. That means wealth is still flowing from the poor to the rich, not the other way around. Even foreign investment often benefits outsiders more than locals. Multinationals get tax breaks, cheap labor, and free land. Local economies get pollution, low wages, and dependency. And the global financial system ensures it stays that way. According to Oxfam, just 1% of the world's population now owns more wealth than the remaining 99% combined. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to. Today's empires don't need soldiers. They have algorithms. They don't invade. They invest. Rich nations control the world's data, patents, brands, and currencies. Poor nations control labor, resources, and dreams. Digital colonization is the new frontier. Think about it. 90% of African internet traffic passes through servers owned by US or European companies. Most developing countries can't even tax global tech giants properly. And global trade is still priced in US dollars, giving one nation enormous power over everyone else. Meanwhile, the inequality is no longer just between nations, it's within them too. Dan, in America, the richest 1% control nearly half the nation's wealth. In India, it's 77%. The same patterns that once defined global inequality are now repeating inside countries between elites and everyone else. It's not just rich countries versus poor countries, it's rich people versus the rest of the world. Let's connect the dots. Colonial extraction created dependency. Global institutions turned that dependency into debt. Globalization amplified it through trade and technology. And now, digital capitalism locks it in through ownership and data. The rich stay rich not because they work harder, but because their systems compound wealth. The poor stay poor, not because they're lazy, but because their systems extract it. Every dollar, every trade deal, every loan carries history within it. A history that began centuries ago and never truly ended. 3 takeaways. Takeaway 1. Wealth follows power, not fairness. Economic success isn't just about effort, it's about who controls the rules. When one group writes the laws of trade, money, and ownership, they also write the future. Takeaway 2. Institutions matter more than resources. Countries that invest in strong education, transparent governance, and innovation rise. Those that rely on extraction fall. It's not what's underground that matters, it's what's inside the classroom. Takeaway 3. The system won't change itself. Inequality compounds, and the rich have incentives to keep things as they are. Only coordinated effort, fair trade, debt relief, and investment in people can shift the cycle. The world today is wealthier than ever, and yet more unequal than ever. If the current trajectory continues, by 2050, the richest 1% could own nearly 2/3 of global wealth. But history also teaches something else. No empire, no system, no imbalance lasts forever. When inequality grows too large, societies break. When opportunities vanish, revolutions begin. So perhaps the real question isn't why the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. It's how long the world can keep running like this before something gives. Because the story of global inequality isn't just about money. It's about humanity, about who gets to dream, build, and live with dignity. If this story made you question how the global economy really works, then don't let it end here. Share it, discuss it, challenge it. Because understanding inequality is the first step to ending it. The world was built this way, but it doesn't have to stay this way.